and delivered an address in English, highlighting several key Americans for their exemplary lives and model of Christian values. He mentioned two well-known figures, Abraham Lincoln and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And then he mentioned Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton. Day was the co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, whose cause for canonization had recently been opened. And then there was the Trappist monk and best-selling author Thomas Merton. About Merton, Pope Francis said, "He remains a source of spiritual inspiration and a guide for many people. In his autobiography, he wrote, 'I came into the world free by nature in the image of God. I was nevertheless the prisoner of my own violence and my own selfishness, in the image of the world into which I was born. That world was the picture of hell, full of men like myself, loving God and yet hating him. Born to love him, living instead in fear of hopeless self-contradictory hungers.' Merton was above all a man of prayer, a thinker who challenged the certitudes of his time and opened new horizons for souls and for the Church. He was also a man of dialogue, a promoter of peace between peoples and religions." Despite Pope Francis's clear admiration and ringing endorsement of Merton's life and writings as a model for Christian living, particularly in our modern age, few people had heard of the Trappist monk and best-selling author. He simply wasn't a household name in 2015. Many that may have heard of Merton before the Pope's address to Congress likely associated the name with an author of books on prayer and spirituality. And indeed, they would have good reason. This is certainly true. After his unexpected best-selling spiritual autobiography published in 1948 titled The Seven-Story Mountain, which is still in print today, Merton wrote several books on prayer and spirituality. But that is not all he wrote about. This Now You Know Media course is about some of the other themes about which Merton wrote. Subjects like searching for and striving to understand one's true self in the midst of a complex and modern world, the quest for authenticity, the reality of violence in the world, and the possible nonviolent solutions, what the relationship between nonviolence and pacifism is, and what fear has to do with war. Merton wrote an impressive amount and with prescient clarity about the injustice of structural racism, about the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and of the reality of white privilege. He also wrote frequently about the liturgical year and the role Christian liturgy should play in our modern lives, and his poetry bears a certain sense of justice and the search for justice. These are the key themes of the lectures in this course. Although one course is never ample enough to cover all the details we might otherwise like, my aim is to highlight some of the areas of Merton's insights and wisdom that have not been as widely considered, studied, or known. For many people who know Merton's work, especially his writings on the spiritual life and on prayer, these subjects in his writings will be new. For others, this course allows for an opportunity to explore these timely themes more deeply. Either way, it is my hope that the insights and wisdom of this 20th century monk and author may provide us with guidance for our 21st century world. But before we begin exploring these themes, I'd like to offer a short overview of Merton's life, in order to introduce him to those encountering his work for the first time, or perhaps refresh the memory if you are a longtime Merton enthusiast. If you are already familiar with the basics of his life, times, and work, feel free to skip ahead to the second lecture. What is appealing about Thomas Merton? Merton's experience of ongoing conversion, his striving to embrace his whole self, both flawed and graced, is what allowed for an ever-widening appreciation in his search for faith, his practice of prayer, his efforts in dialogue, his commitment to social criticism, and his ongoing reflection. It all begins on January 31st in 1915. Merton was born in Prades, France. Merton's parents were Ruth Jenkins and Owen Merton. Ruth was an American, and Owen from New Zealand. They were both avant-garde types of folks, artists who were committed to a artistic lifestyle. Owen Merton's work was displayed in numerous galleries and still is owned in private collections today. In addition to Thomas Merton, Ruth and Owen had one other son, Merton's little brother John Paul. When Merton was 6 years old, his mother Ruth died from stomach cancer.